Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Amid ongoing efforts by Israeli authorities to battle the corona contagion, Jerusalem is forced to consider the implications of the pandemic in the two Palestinian entities neighboring the country. And while relations with the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah is institutionalized, the Jewish state has seen the mutual benefit of working with health authorities in the Islamist-controlled Gaza Strip. To discuss the ongoing situation in the Palestinian-controlled territories, joining us from central Israel is Colonel in Reserve Reuven Ben-Shalom, who is a cross-cultural strategist and associate at the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism. Shalom.
Shalom.
Also joining us from across the pond in Vancouver, BC, Canada, is Dr. Amira Halperin, who is a research fellow at the British Columbia University in Vancouver. Welcome. And I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst here in Jerusalem, Mr. Amir Oren.
Thank you.
Mr. Oren, give us a broader understanding on the current situation vis-a-vis the Palestinians in the territories, as well as its dynamic with the Israeli authorities here in Jerusalem, Israel.
Well, as you surely recall, Jonathan, some 25 years ago, when the Oslo process was in its heyday, Israel started building fences and walls around it, first in Gaza and then across the West Bank, across what is called the Green Line. And these fences and walls are supposed to stop terrorists and other people who are not wanted in Israel. But obviously, no obstacle is going to stop a virus. And therefore, it doesn't really matter whether Israel has good or bad relations with the Palestinian authorities in Ramallah or the Hamas regime in Gaza. They must all collaborate in order to take care of this common enemy, the COVID-19. What is happening is that up to now, for some reason, the Palestinian Authority has reported better results than Israel in its fight against the virus. Now, perhaps this is being caused by a delay. Perhaps it will be revealed later that there are many more people who were infected in the West Bank, and therefore more than a few who have died. As for Gaza, there is a lack of test kits, and therefore the Israelis have given their military laboratory the task of testing, or at least going over the tests which the Gazans have provided them. It's a unique case of cooperation against the virus, and perhaps even some omen of what is to come.
Indeed, a unique characteristic of cooperation between two enemies, for that matter. Colonel Ben-Shalom, aside from the security challenges pertaining to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if you will, there is also an aspect, as Mr. Oren says correctly, of challenges vis-a-vis the corona contagion, and also the implications of the economy in the Palestinian territories, whether it be in the West Bank territories where the Palestinian Authority is in control, or the Gaza Strip. Obviously, if there is social unrest as a consequence of inability to work and so on, where it's very much reliant, at least in the West Bank, on tourism, which is non-existent at this stage, the Palestinians are going to have to deal with some challenges in the near future, which is going to directly impact also the state of Israel.
Absolutely, Jonathan. I think the most important thing in the relationship as far as the Palestinian economy are the tens and thousands of Palestinians that come into Israel to work every day, coming in the morning through the cross points in the fence and then going back in the evening. Amir Oren was speaking about the fence. Of course, it's not just to keep us here and them there, but there's a back and forth all the time, Israeli settlers and Palestinians that come into work. And that's a vital component of the Palestinian economy. It's so much so that it was very important for Israel to host about 50,000 Palestinian workers in Israel and actually have them stay in Israel for a few weeks. But that changed now, also because of the policy in the Palestinian Authority and because of the reality on the ground in Israel. And many of them are going back to the Palestinian Authority area, to the West Bank. And that's going to create a burden. We're concerned about civil unrest in the Israeli society, so more so should we be in the Palestinian side of it. We are connected vessels, health-wise, financially, security-wise, which is why we collaborate so much. Remember that our security collaboration has been going on perfectly for many years, keeping that under the radar as we do other things overtly, like promote our narratives and our conflict. Now this is a new thing where we're on the table overtly cooperating and talking about it, and there's a good reason, because it's important for us as it is important for them to contain the virus. A big outbreak there is a huge problem for them and for us.
Indeed. Dr. Halperin, I'd like to refer the next question to you. With regard to the aspect of a couple of weeks ago, there was a rocket being fired from the Gaza Strip towards Israel. And despite that situation, which is not unprecedented, the current situation where there are not enough test kits, as Mr. Oren stated earlier, drew the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, in the Gaza Strip to threaten Israel that unless it makes sure that the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have enough ventilators to treat this contagion and have enough test kits, the Israelis won't be able to breathe, referring to 6 million Israelis, of course, referring to the Jewish community in the state of Israel. To what degree do you see Israel's ongoing efforts to actually treat the Gazans and the Palestinian Arabs in the West Bank in a manner of crucial understanding that if they are going to start to rebel on the local authorities there, it will spill over into Israel and create a lot more havoc than what Israel has to deal with now?
First of all, there are two issues that we have to look at concerning the situation in Gaza. The first is, of course, as you said, that Hamas is a terrorist organization and Israel has to deal with Hamas as a terrorist organization. We know that if Israel would help Hamas, this would not be enough, because obviously the situation in Gaza is such that there would be needed much more help than the current ventilation that can be offered. The second thing that's important to bear in mind and to highlight relates to my current research in Canada, is to the fact that in Gaza, there are 1.9 million refugees. So I work at the moment on research of refugees from the Middle East, mostly from Syria, including Palestinians that arrived to Canada. And I can tell you that the main problem that we have with the coronavirus is the most vulnerable communities, the refugees, are being the mostly affected because, we have 8 refugee camps in Gaza. So we don't have the situation, we don't have good health conditions. The life conditions are terrible. According to UNRWA, the situation there is in crisis. So how do you help refugees where you're talking about social distancing and keep your hygiene and so on and so forth, where the reality is that you have a density in a refugee camp. It's very difficult to keep all the normal regulations that we have to look at these times. So I think that it's a good thing that Israel is trying to negotiate with Hamas and to try to help Hamas. But as far as I can see it, it's going to take a long way until Hamas will actually manage to tackle the problems and confront the problems of the COVID-19. I see an escalation in the future. I don't see anything that would help Hamas only if Israel would be involved. I think that it's also a matter of involvement of the international community as it is now. We know that in Gaza there is a problem of electricity and water, and 80% of their electricity and water are being pursued by international help. And we know that UNRWA is the agency that helps Palestinian refugees in general. So it has to be a collaboration between Israel and other actors in the international arena as well.
Mr. Oren, there are some angles, of course, to the situation. It's not a black and white scenario. Specifically for the West Bank, for instance, the Palestinian Authority said it allocated some $138 million US dollars in order to assist the people that usually work in different sectors that are most affected. Just several days ago, the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority, the transition technocrat government that has been operating there for quite some time, indicated that many countries are assisting the Palestinian Authority, including the European Union, which donated 24.5 million euros, and other countries around the world. To what degree do you see the current situation under control, considering also the fact that there's not enough data, not in Israel, not anywhere around the world, with regard to how long this is going to last and how are authorities actually going to implement their exit strategy in a manner that will not impact the health of the general public?
Well, everyone, everywhere, is still in a state of shock. In Israel, for instance, it's been less than a month since the first casualty. Now we have more than 100 people who have died from the coronavirus. But it all started on March the 20th. Up until then, we have prepared. And the same goes for everywhere else. The aftershock is going to be very painful. We are going to see protests and social unrest in the West Bank, in Gaza, as well as in Israel. The sums which you have mentioned are a drop in the bucket. And only a few weeks before this crisis started, you may remember, perhaps dimly, a deal of the century, President Trump unveiling a peace plan, $50 billion for the Palestinian economy when peace comes. Nobody can afford now, neither the United States nor any country in Europe. They have to recover their own economies. They cannot contribute to anyone else, including the Palestinians. So from the positive angle, the tiny invisible virus has been the great equalizer. Rich countries, poor countries, nobility, commoners, everyone is exposed much the same way to the virus. Of course, the negative angle, it is going to cause a lot of resentment when this is over. And the lesson for Israel, as both Amira and Reuven mentioned, is that the standard of living for the Palestinians is for Israel a strategic consideration. Israel should make an effort to raise the standard of living of its neighbors for its own good.
Indeed, Colonel Ben-Shalom, one of the strategies implemented over the course of the past several years was elevate the level of living or the standard of living in the Palestinian West Bank, also the Gaza Strip. There were some efforts to do so, but the West Bank in particular, the moment somebody has something to lose, he's not very quick to put it as a sacrifice, with all ideology being beautiful for some people in order to highlight their narratives of interests. But when it comes down to it, people are losing their livelihoods. If there's 26 point something percent unemployment in Israel, which translates into more than 1.08 million people here unemployed, unable to provide for their families, in the Palestinian territories, we're talking about much larger figures, which may impact also the state of Israel. Again, social unrest translates into security problems for Israel and Jerusalem.
True. Some time back, I met a great guy from Gaza. We spent a whole night together in Sheba Hospital in Israel. His son was being treated there. And we were talking about, life and what do we need in life. And he took out a little bag and he showed me, this is all I need. Pita bread, and olives. He said, give me the pita bread and the olives and I'm satisfied. That's all I need. Now, that's not funny. We are talking about a situation where many people that their livelihood comes from Israel, many, like I said, tens of thousands working in Israel, and the Palestinian Authority won't have money to even buy the bread and the olives. Now, that is a critical consideration for Israeli security, too. I think the Palestinian Authority have been doing a great job. I'm even surprised to see how vigorously they pursued this. clamping down on the situation, understanding relatively early the situation, even better than other countries. I attribute this also to the good coordination with Israel, but they have been taking strong steps to curtail the virus. So far, the results, I think, are not bad. We have to be very careful because when there is an outbreak and when you let your foot off the pedal, which we may be seeing these days, then we could see the big outbreak. But I am optimistic that hand in hand, Israel and the Palestinian Authority will be able to mitigate this and flatten the curve. The issue of the financial prospects for the future have to be dealt with Israel's strategy. Remember, as Israelis, we have no strategy, or actually, as an Israeli civilian, I have no idea what the strategy is. They're working on it. All I recommend my government to do is to have in mind, with our strategy, the Palestinian side too. It has to go hand in hand. We're going to have a lot of infrastructure delayed by 6 months at least in Israel. People are not getting their houses. The workers come from the Palestinian side. They're missing their livelihood. Again, it's one boat. We're in one boat together. We have to push the financial issue together.
Indeed. Dr. Halperin, you were talking earlier about the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. I would like to ask you specifically vis-a-vis the fact that there are not enough tests being undertook in the Gaza Strip or the West Bank for that matter. There are very limited numbers. If we're talking about 10,000 tests per day in Israel, we're talking about a few hundreds in the West Bank and maybe half that in the Gaza Strip, something that has led the Islamist Hamas, the Islamist Hamas organization in the Palestinian enclave to actually not really establish true restrictions on the population. We still see the markets bustling and people roaming around, nothing to do with the refugee camps, which are not very different from other Palestinian cities, except for maybe the rich neighborhoods of Ramallah and other places in the Gaza City. To what degree do you think that the authorities in the Hamas-controlled territory are comprehending the severity of the situation vis-a-vis the corona contagion?
I think that according to what I know from the people that I spoke with is that there is a fear among the Hamas leadership, fear, of course, from the consequences of the coronavirus, and I'm sure that they would like to make an effort in order to help the people there and to follow up the regulations like it is in Israel and in other countries worldwide, though, as you said, it doesn't happen really because it's still difficult for them to implement. So I think that the problem with Hamas is they are trying to blame Israel for the situation. They are trying to gain political power. I think the blame game is the main issue here because Hamas, as we know, used the people in Gaza as a tool to achieve its goals. And if I may add, relating also to Hamas and how it uses the people, I would like to add shortly that there is also the problem of blaming Israel due to the fact that we have technology today that enables the Hamas to do it. So it's not only Hamas, but it's also the Palestinians. And I'm talking about the situation where people are disseminating fake news relating to the spread of coronavirus, blaming Israel. I work with a cybersecurity company. The name of the company is Sayabra. We cooperate. They are based in Israel. I'm in Canada, and we work together and highlighting the issue of this dangerous of fake news related to coronavirus in this current situation. I think it's very difficult for Hamas. It would be difficult for Hamas because they don't really want, they're torn between from one hand, help the people there because they're afraid. From the other hand, I don't think that they really want and able to follow up the regulations and the orders that have to be really enforced like it happens in Israel now.
Indeed. Mr. Oren, I would like to ask you about the Islamist Hamas organization during this time. We've been seeing a lot of communications between the Islamic Republic of Iran and Hamas lately. There were some communications between Yahya Sinwar, also Khalid Mash'al and so on, talking with their Iranian counterparts in Tehran about different aspects pertaining to the Gaza Strip. mutual learning, if you will, vis-a-vis this contagion, but also a lot of communication going between Moscow and Hamas. Not to forget that Moscow does not view the Islamist Hamas organization as a terrorist entity, but rather as the legal entity which was officially elected in 2006 to represent the Palestinian people. To what degree do you see the Hamas organization actually embolden and strengthen in the current situation because of the crisis, being able to exploit this situation to overpower even vis-a-vis the Palestinian territories in the West Bank?
In the discipline of signal intelligence, people always talk about chatter versus content, which means that even if you didn't manage to break the code of your adversary, the fact that there is a high volume of traffic between two points means that something is being brewed. Nevertheless, the chatter which you refer to between Gaza and Tehran or Gaza and Moscow doesn't mean a lot currently. We are coming to the end of the first third of this particular year, 2020. One can almost bet that 2020 will be stricken off the calendar. It's a lost year for all practical purposes. We are going to have the elections in the United States towards the end of the year. But other than that, nothing much except for the COVID-19 would have happened this year. Hamas, much like everyone else, has to take care of this problem before everything else. The last few weeks have been the quietest on Israel's southern border for many years. Because we are all so focused on Corona, we almost didn't see what has not happened. And that is that the Israeli residents and children in the south can go to bed peacefully. Rockets, except for the one you mentioned, are not flying about. The Israeli Air Force does not conduct retaliatory raids. And it will take the rest of the year. And the lesson, as the poet said, no man is an island, no entity is an island. And there are two contradictory vectors here. You have home isolation for people, families, but you cannot have an isolationist policy. Countries, and Gaza is a country, must cooperate. And this cooperation will probably go on in various forms, even when the crisis is over.
Indeed. Colonel Ben-Shalom, I'd like to ask you the next question pertaining to two topics. One, Mr. Oren already mentioned earlier, is the deal of the century. The second one is the fact that the government, in light of the deal of the century here in Israel, or the interim government, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, were communicating about the fact that they want to assert Israeli sovereignty over the significant parts of the West Bank, including the two biblical territories of Judea and Samaria and the Jordan Valley, which is which is a strategic territory. This, of course, seems less realistic at this moment. Are those two angles obsolete due to the coronavirus?
We have to separate between our emotions and our political stance and reality on the ground. For most of us now, that is irrelevant. Who cares about that deal of the century? That was a one-sided thing anyway, constructed by Israel and the United States, and the Palestinian wouldn't hear of it. And the whole idea of the deal of the century was that the Palestinians have to come to the table, negotiate, and agree on a peace accord. So in a way, right now, it is irrelevant, totally irrelevant. What happens when this is reignited sometime along the way, in a few months from now? Who knows? The annexation, I think, was a political that Bibi Netanyahu held very closely, played with it very wisely before the elections, by the way, almost throwing that card on the table a day after announcing the deal, which of course had nothing to do with the deal and even irritated the Americans. But this card, again, is going to be played in rhetoric, and may be played sometime soon when it suits him politically. Again, I do not see this part of a strategic, or at least a wise strategic move now to be implemented on the ground. I see this only in the political realm. Remember, the Palestinians back then didn't want to hear about it. Certainly now they're dealing with survival. This is irrelevant. The money factor, and remember the chapter about the money and the deal is very, very long. I read most of the deal. I got lost in that chapter. A lot of issues that have to do with finances are totally irrelevant. Who's going to pay? America is backtracking. The whole strategic policy is America first. After this, it's probably going to be totally first. So who knows where this is going to go? I would recommend just to keep an eye on the political realm. My recommendation to the Israeli government is to do nothing and only play hand in hand with the Americans, and only do it when the Palestinians are on board. We just have to wait and see.
Indeed, this is a time for...
That was almost Trump. We'll see what happens.
Indeed, this is a time for dynamic activities. Unfortunately, we're drawing near to the end of the program, so I'd like to hear an analysis for the near future from each and every one of you. Dr. Halperin, we'll start with you.
I would like to connect to Mr. Oren claim relating to duality of Hamas as a terrorist organization and as established government, which is very problematic for Israel. We cannot expect that whether they are going to negotiate with Hamas on the ventilations or not, whether Hamas would demand more or whether he used his terrorist vehicles in order to, again, threat Israel, like you said. And it is very problematic that Israel government has to deal from one hand with the coronavirus and with the second hand with Hamas, which is very difficult to negotiate with. So we have to really differentiate between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. There is a very serious problem in Gaza and a totally different problem dealing with workers in the West Bank that, as we all talked about, work in Israel. So there are two separate problems, but intertwined, and Israel really in the near future would have to take good care into the situation in the Palestinian Authority.
Indeed. Colonel Ben-Shalom, unfortunately, we don't have very much time. Very shortly.
Don't think about this with Western mentality. Western mentality is, after this, we should have peace. We're all the same, brothers and sisters. They think long-term. That's my recommendation.
Mr. Oren?
Well, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is not getting any younger or any healthier. When we are over this crisis, he will be closer to retirement one way or the other than he is now. So we don't know what will happen in the territories. The Israeli military tries to keep its readiness for any scenario, but it will be more difficult under these conditions.
Indeed, the day the Palestinian Authority leader will not be amongst us anymore, the battle for succession will start among the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, this is all the time that we have for today, even though this topic is a lot more to expand about. But I'd like to thank Dr. Halperin for being with us from Canada, Colonel Ben-Shalom with us from Central Israel. Thank you so very much. I'd like also to thank Mr. Amir Oren,
thank you,
as well as our viewers. Thank you very much for being with us here, and we will see you next time.
You just watched TV7 Jerusalem Studio. We encourage you to pray for the challenges raised in today's program. If you were blessed by our production, please consider supporting TV7 Israel. The details of our respective bank accounts for donations from Europe and the United States appear on the screen. Your generosity allows us to continue to serve God's calling, to broadcast content that truly matters through TV7 Israel from Jerusalem.